Hello, everyone. Today we are going to explore the ideas of Henry Bergson, an influential philosopher of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Bergson tackled a multitude of themes, including consciousness, laughter, and the critique of science. He was particularly critical of scientism, the belief that the scientific method can explain all phenomena of the world. We will examine a concept that poses particular challenges to science: time. Time, as a philosophical concept, is surprisingly complex, especially because it seems simple and obvious to us. Often, the greatest complexity lies in the most apparent things. Time permeates our daily existence. We see it through clocks, our schedules, and the effects of aging. Questioning the existence of time may seem absurd to some, but trying to precisely define what time is quickly leads to considerable difficulties, illustrated by St. Augustine, who already highlighted this complexity. St. Augustine expresses an intrinsic curiosity about time. We think we understand it intuitively, but as soon as we try to explain it, our certainty evaporates. This paradox lies in the impossibility of explaining time without assuming prior knowledge of what it is. For example, if we try to define time through evolution, saying that time is what causes change, we are already presupposing an understanding of time, creating a definitional circle. St. Augustine addresses this complexity by proposing to see time as a division between the past, present, and future, three dimensions that constitute our temporal experience. However, this definition doesn't really elucidate the nature of time, because, as Augustine points out, the past no longer exists, being by definition gone. This raises the question of the reality of time and its perception. The past, once elapsed, exists only as memory or trace, and the future, not yet having occurred, belongs to our reality only as mental or imaginary projection. However, our experience of life always unfolds in the present. What was present becomes past and loses its concrete reality, surviving only in memory. Conversely, what is anticipated as future will become present when it arrives. Thus, one might deduce that only the present is tangible. But this observation raises a dilemma, for the present is fleeting. As soon as a moment manifests, it instantly flips into the past, escaping our grasp. This elusive nature of the present suggests that it is as intangible as the past or future, leading to the paradox where neither the past, the future, nor even the present seem to possess a tangible existence. This conceptual challenge reveals the complexity of time, far beyond mere wordplay. Time, as a concept, defies our understanding and our ability to fully grasp it, illustrating its profoundly enigmatic nature. In the face of time's elusive complexity, it is useful to turn to Henry Bergson for a more nuanced exploration. Bergson distinguishes two types of time: physical time and duration. Physical time, according to Bergson, is a standardized unit of measure used to sequence events in relative order. In the international system, time is universally divided into seconds, minutes, and hours, each unit being a subdivision of the next. A day has 24 hours, an hour 60 minutes, and a minute 60 seconds, a division that dates back to the Babylonians and illustrates the concept of physical time as an objective measure, uniform for all individuals on Earth. In our daily life, the universality of time is an underappreciated blessing. Imagine a world where each minute flowed differently for each of us. The simple coordination of a meeting would become a puzzle, with lives intertwined in a chaotic ballet of desynchronized moments. Fortunately, physical time, the scale we all share, is uniform and unperturbed by our personal perceptions. This universal agreement on time is not a coincidence. Take the example of a year. Common in everyday language, a year is not just 365 days. It represents the complete cycle of the Earth around the sun. This duration is not decided by us but dictated by a physical phenomenon, anchoring our measure of time in the concrete reality of the cosmos. Similarly, a day, defined as a 24-hour period, is nothing but the time it takes for the Earth to complete one rotation on its axis. These measurements, far from arbitrary, are witnesses to the natural order, providing our human experience with a reliable and objective structure. Thus, time, in its essence, is a physical, measurable phenomenon, defining our days and years with precision, independent of our will or perception. The structuring of time into hours and minutes is a convention, not an absolute necessity. In theory, we could redefine a day as 20 or 30 hours. which would naturally adjust the length of an hour and a minute. This modified framework would be entirely viable in an alternative temporal system, highlighting the arbitrary and constructed nature of physical time, divided into measurable and objective units, independent of our individual perception. However, according to Bergson, this approach encounters two pitfalls. First, it reduces time to a succession of discrete moments, neglecting its continuous flow. Time does not break down into isolated instances, as the seconds ticking on a clock might suggest. The experience of time is more fluid and continuous than a series of distinct seconds. The reality of the passing time is not limited to 1 second following another, but is an uninterrupted transition, where each moment is inherently linked to the next, forming an inseparable continuum. What truly matters occurs during the second, in the space that separates the limits of this time interval. I invite you to think about the term interval, as it illustrates our traditional conception of time, perceived as a series of intervals. However, it is crucial to understand that time is not just the ends of these intervals, but rather lies in the activity that takes place within them. If you have ever observed a clock with continuous movement, without jerks in its second hand, you have likely felt a certain disturbance. This unsettling observation, contrasting with our habit of watching the seconds tick by one, can give the impression that time accelerates. This phenomenon underscores how a clock with uninterrupted movement can seem to alter our perception of time, bringing us closer to its true essence, a constant flow. This experience reveals our tendency to fragment and compartmentalize time, a practice that Bergson considers erroneous. It highlights our difficulty in grasping time as a continuum, as our perception is often truncated, cut into distinct units. The fundamental error that Bergson points out is our propensity to break up time, to distort it by reducing it to a series of successive segments. Time, in reality, does not proceed in jumps. It flows continuously. Our habit of dividing it into intervals, of perceiving it as a succession of isolated moments, second by second or minute by minute, distorts our understanding of its nature. Indeed, time is not subordinate to the units of measure we use to quantify it. It does not stop at the end of a minute to begin the next, but flows incessantly. This fragmented conception of time is, according to Bergson, an inadequate representation, although the tendency of the human mind to segment reality is understandable and logical. This segmentation, like that exercised through language, is a way for the mind to appropriate the world. For example, by using the word trees, we crystallize a multitude of entities and concepts into a single designation, illustrating our natural tendency to structure and define reality. When the term trees is uttered, everyone visualizes in their mind an image of a tree, even though this specific tree does not exist outside our imagination. This is what could be called an archetype. This mental image forms because it is impossible for us to represent all the trees that have existed, exist now, and will exist in the future. Thus, the concept of trees is a mental construct, an intellectual fabrication intended to group and crystallize the essence of all trees to facilitate communication. Bergson suggests that language primarily serves a practical need, that of communicating with others. He thus recognizes the usefulness of segmenting reality because, to share and discuss this reality, it must be fixed in words. Similarly, we structure time in units like next year to talk about and conceptualize it, thereby facilitating our interaction with the world and with each other. When we talk about the day before yesterday or in 3 hours, we use these terms to orient ourselves and share our temporal landmarks. These conventions become effective for cohabitation as soon as we agree on these measures. However, just as words can alter reality, conceptualizing time as a series of intervals also denatures it. This critique highlights what might be called the mathematization of time, representing it in segments or intervals, adopting mathematical concepts that do not account for the continuous flow of reality. The tendency to spatialize time, representing it as an arrow, for example, reflects this mathematization. This spatial representation evokes linear and continuous movement, similar to the Earth orbiting the Sun or the clock's hand completing its cycle. Thus, our usual perception of time, often taken for granted and uncontested, is in reality the subject of profound questioning and reassessment. The difficulties in understanding time are not limited to the previous critique alone. Bergson highlighted a second issue. While time flows constantly for everyone, our individual experience of time varies. In other words, although a year remains the same for everyone, our perception of time is unique. Consider a common example. While watching this video, if you find the content engaging, time seems to fly by. Conversely, if it bores you, the minutes appear to drag on. Bergson thus distinguishes between objective time, uniform for everyone, and subjective time, or personal perception of time. This latter concept, which he calls duration, differs from objective time, which is a standardized measure. Duration embodies our subjective experience of time, influenced by our emotions and experiences. In moments of happiness or exhilaration, for example, we tend to forget time, which then no longer serves as a tangible measure for us. When our mind dwells on the passing time, it often indicates that we are not fully engaged in our activity, which can give the impression that time is stretching. Conversely, when we are totally absorbed in a task, time seems to disappear. This phenomenon does not mean that time flows differently, but that our perception of time is altered by our level of involvement. To combat boredom, the suggested strategy is an exercise of intense concentration, paying attention to every detail. By focusing in this way, even the smallest aspects become fascinating, transforming our experience of time. It's an effective method to make time interesting and avoid boredom. According to Bergson, this subjective experience of time, or duration, is radically different from the objective notion of time. The duration experienced during an evening with a loved one is not comparable to that spent in a meeting with a superior, although the measured time is the same. This idea illustrates the distinction between lived time and measured time, emphasizing the impact of our activities and feelings on our perception of time. Failing to distinguish between objective and subjective time is a philosophical error, as it amounts to ignoring a crucial aspect of time, perception. For Bergson, duration is primarily about perception, even though it is linked to an objective reality. The value of our experience of time often transcends the physical reality of time itself. It is essential to recognize that our lived experience is constantly shaped by our perception. For example, telling a child that they will receive a gift in 4 months for Christmas will make that period seem endless to them, amplified by the impatience this wait induces. This impatience is an emotional reaction that colors their perception of time. Moreover, the experience of time is relative to age. For an 8-year-old child, a year represents a much more significant portion of their life than it does for a 40-year-old adult. Thus, the perception of time is influenced by external factors to its objective measure, highlighting its relative nature. Summarizing what has been discussed since the beginning of this video, we have explored the notion that time, as a philosophical subject, is profoundly complex and delicate to grasp. Bergson guides us through this complexity by differentiating between objective time, a physical, mathematical, and spatial entity, and subjective time, or duration, which is primarily about our psychological perception. Delving into Bergsonian thought, we touch on a key concept for understanding the nature of time, at least in its perceived dimension: memory. Recall St. Augustine's assertion that the past does not exist except as a memory or a trace of memory. For instance, a wine stain on a white shirt is not just a mark. It symbolizes a past event, extending its existence into the present. Similarly, a memory acts as an extension of our past experiences into the present time, showing how past events continue to live through the traces they leave in our memory. And memories often shape themselves quite distinctly from events as they actually occurred. They are not faithful reproductions, but reinterpretations of reality. A memory carries the imprint of our personal perception of events. For example, a traumatic event may be accentuated in our memory, while a moment of happiness can color a memory with joy and satisfaction that persists into the present. To say that the past does not exist or that it is no more is not entirely accurate. The past persists in the form of traces, memories, accumulated stories that shape our current reality. We are the product of our personal history. Who we are today is the result of our past experiences. Thus, in a way, we should be grateful to our past, for it has shaped us into the person we are today. Without those prior experiences, we would be fundamentally different. Through the lens of memory, we see that the past, far from being obsolete, remains alive and influential in our present. Time is embodied in the preservation of the past within the present, or rather, in the maintenance of the flow of events that led us to the here and now. The role of memory is to compile the various stages of our personal evolution, thus anchoring our current identity. Without memory, we would be devoid of landmarks, unable to recall even our own name, because it is this faculty of memorizing our experiences that forges our understanding of who we are. Memory is therefore fundamental to our self-awareness. In its absence, not only does self-awareness fade, but personal identity itself dissolves. We are defined by our memories, by the recollection of our experiences. However, there is an interesting paradox. While time is inherently tied to preservation, it is also essential to transformation. Time is not just an archive of the past, but also the arena in which change and evolution occur. Without time, change would be inconceivable, as it is the framework allowing for evolution and transformation. Facilitating change without time is as tricky as trying to nourish oneself without being able to eat. Time is essential to change because it is the driving force. Take a simple and familiar example, the before and after comparisons, often used in contexts of physical transformation, like bodybuilding. We place two images side by side and examine the transformations that have taken place. When we look at these images, we see a significant evolution. But what facilitated this change? It's time. The crucial element in these before and after comparisons is what we don't see, the interval between the two snapshots. This interval, the elapsed time, is the catalyst for the observed metamorphosis. It is ironic that to demonstrate the effects of time, everything but time itself is presented, highlighting the outcomes rather than the process. This illustrates that the real agent of change, evolution, and transformation is time, even though it remains invisible in these comparisons. Time can manifest in various ways: fast or slow, continuous or intermittent, regular or irregular. However, it materializes in our consciousness only through the prism of change. Time is not directly perceived in its essence. We conceive it through the transformations that occur between the starting and ending points of a given interval. Time is, above all, a force of transformation, a facilitator of metamorphosis. Bergson teaches us that time is essentially what we make of it. Unoccupied time can seem endless and conducive to boredom, while every second can be seen as an opportunity for growth and experience, transforming time into a precious ally rather than an enemy, as Baudelaire suggests. If the idea of time in continuous flux distresses you, if you dream of being able to suspend it, remember that the cessation of time also means a cessation of existence, because we would no longer be there to witness the constant transformation that defines reality and of which we are an integral part. Our involvement in this unceasing process of change makes time precious and encourages us to live it fully. Thank you for your attention.